Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи, в эфире программа Ushanka Show. And in today's video we're going to talk about recycling glass bottles and glass jars, and why this recycling was so successful in the Soviet Union and why it was such a pain in the butt. I already covered the topic of recycling in the Soviet Union in the long format Ushanka Digest video. Link will be below in the comment section, but I realized we need to talk some more about glass recycling. First of all, I need to remind you that plastic bottles or aluminum cans were unknown in the Soviet Union. We used the glass bottles for pretty much everything: vodka, wine, beer, lemonades, pop, even milk. The only non-glass containers I remember were those silly looking triangle shaped packets with milk. And then sometimes in the middle of the 80s we started getting a Tetra Pak, so those were 1 liter containers for milk. And besides those containers, milk was always sold in the glass bottles. There were wide mouth milk bottles, and that was the name, milk bottle, молочная бутылка. Most juices like tomato juice, apple juice were sold only in large 3-liter jars, so it's almost a gallon. So that was the most popular size of the jar container, was 3 liter. And all this glass was successfully recycled, or I should say reused, because they didn't break those glass bottles and jars. They actually refilled them, hopefully after washing those bottles really well. And the reason why this recycling program was so successful is because the government set up extremely high price for deposits. So every time you buy, the most popular container was the glass half-liter bottle. You have to pay 20 kopecks deposit. So for example, if you buy a bottle of lemonade, limonade, Buratina, the Pinocchio, you pay 30 kopecks. Lemonade was 10 kopecks and the bottle deposit was 20. And 20 kopecks doesn't sound like that much. I live in Michigan and here we pay 10 cents for a glass container or plastic bottle. But you need to keep in mind that average Soviet salary in 1980s was 150 rubles. So paying 20 kopecks for 150 rubles salary, it will be like paying $2 per bottle if you make $1,500. So that was a lot of money. I had to look it up. So in Michigan, they introduced the Michigan Bottle Bill, which included 10 cents deposit on beverage containers back in 1976. And of course, 10 cents in 1976, it's like would be 50 cents now to pay for each container. So no wonder less and less people recycle bottles and cans in Michigan. I see more and more trash along the roads. Picture if we had to pay $2 per aluminum can or plastic bottle, the streets will be clean again. And even at 10 cents a can, returning the bottles could be quite a hassle. And I don't know how they handle returns back in the 80s. Now we have automatic machines. You don't deal with people. You just toss your bottles or cans in the machines, and then they print your receipt with how much money you get. But still, it could be a long line in a supermarket in the middle of the day. I prefer to go, if I have bottles to return, early in the morning where there's hardly anyone in the supermarket. And that's the trouble people go through to get 10 cents per container. Imagine if there'll be $2 per container. There'll be even more problems. And that was the issue in the Soviet Union, because everyone wanted to return the bottles. And speaking of the Soviet 20 kopek deposit, 20 kopecks could buy you 4 tickets to ride a city bus, like in Kiev or Moscow. And I just looked it up. In Chicago, full fare is $2.25 for a bus ride in Chicago Transit Authority. So 20 kopecks in the bus rides was equal $9. Picture paying $9 for 1 can or 1 bottle. So when your bottle deposit is so astronomically high, no wonder everyone was trying to return bottles, and of course it brought another set of problems. For a long time there was a requirement that the labels must be removed before returning the bottles, and that's what you see on these photos. These poor people, they put their bottles in the puddle to soak, to wet the label so they can be scraped off. So that's a pain in the butt. I think sometimes in the mid-80s they dropped that requirement, because I don't remember my family removing the labels, but obviously it was done since we have these pictures. And another challenge in returning your bottles was, some of you may guessed already, long lines at those so-called приемные пункты стеклопосуды, receiving points of glass containers. There were 2 reasons why we always had long lines to return the bottles. Number one, because everyone wanted to return their bottles, so we had a lot of traffic, of course. And the second reason, which I think was the main reason, the sales clerk would inspect every bottle extremely carefully, because if you had chips anywhere, especially on the top at the neck where you put the cap on, that will disqualify the bottle. So they inspected every bottle, so it took time. If every person will bring 20, 50 bottles, it takes time to accept every bottle before you can get your deposit back. And another problem in returning glass bottles was 100% employment, believe it or not, because everyone had to work. So during the work hours, the only people who could return bottles would be retirees or people who were on vacation or maybe had a sick day. And I made this screenshot. So this is the schedule of the working hours of приемный пункт стеклопосуды, receiving point of glass containers, open from 11 o'clock in the morning till 8 p.m. On Saturday, it's open from 9 till 6 p.m. And then you have lunch break between 3 and 4, and Sunday is a day off. So most people could return bottles only on Saturdays, which means the longest lines were on Saturday. So people would show up at 7 a.m. to get in line before they open at 9. And I remember that was one of my jobs after I come back from school on Saturday. My mom will send me, say, hey, Dad is already in line. Go take over and help us to return the bottles. Of course, you could try to get there before they close at 8 p.m. during the work days, but the challenge was that if they run out of crates to place the bottles, they won't accept any more bottles, and they will put the sign just like you see here in the picture. It says "Tare нет," no crates. So once they run out of empty crates, they'll stop accepting bottles, and usually by 6 p.m. there will be no more crates available. And that's the worst thing that could happen to you. So imagine you have to walk about a kilometer carrying 2 heavy bags full of empty glass bottles, and you arrive to this kiosk and the signage says "Tare нет," no containers. So then you walk another kilometer to another point where they also accept containers, and you can encounter the same signage. So you can spend several hours breaking your back, ripping your arms off with your glass bottles just to find out that no one has empty containers, "Tare нет," and then you just have to carry empty bottles back home. And I read online that it was done on purpose sometimes. I never encountered it myself, but the people will hide, the workers will hide the containers and claim they have no empty containers to accept bottles, but then they will suggest you, hey, if you don't want to walk somewhere else, we'll take it from you, those bottles, although we don't have empty containers for them, but at 50% off. So instead of 20 kopecks, you'll get only 10 kopecks, and the guys at that kiosk will pocket 10 kopecks for themselves. Some desperate people would try to find or steal empty crates like you see at this photo. Most likely these guys are alcoholics, so they know what they're doing. So you sneak into the store, steal empty crates, fill them with the empty bottles, and then you can return them. Even the people claim they have no empty containers, like, here you go, I brought my own containers and there's the bottles in it, give me my money. And while we're on the topic of the glass bottles, I need to mention something about Soviet Pepsi. I don't know why, but they made this specific bottle. It was shaped differently, and it was only 0.33 liter, not standard 0.5 liter bottle, and that was only for Pepsi. There was not other pop, soda, whatever you call it, lemonade was used. It was only a Pepsi bottle, 0.33, and deposit price was 15 kop. Usually you could buy Pepsi only in large cities like Moscow, Leningrad, or Kiev, so returning those bottles also could happen only in large cities. If you take a couple bottles with you and go out of town, those local places won't accept empty Pepsi bottles. You have to bring them back to Kiev or Moscow. And I know a lot of people are skeptical about recycling. Does it make sense at all financially? But it definitely helped to keep the trash off the streets. Just for that reason, I think it was great, but it was a source of a lot of frustration and anger of the Soviet consumers, because returning bottles was a big challenge and a huge waste of time. And speaking of trash, I noticed that switch when I came back to Ukraine in 2002, so I was gone for about 4 years. I noticed how much more trash was everywhere, especially when I went to the village, and the place was pristine. Like, people didn't leave bottles behind, And then I went mushroom hunting and I saw plastic bottles everywhere. So before people would bring alcohol or soda with them, drinking, and then bring them bottles back home to return for deposit, now they just bring plastic bottles and they throw them away. So it told me, yeah, it was a great idea to have deposit at 20 kopecks and make people not throw the trash in the forest. And right after this, there'll be a short video. I believe it's from 1982. So it was filmed to show all the problems that people faced returning the bottles. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like it if you did like it. Your comments are always appreciated. And I'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.